When it comes to installing a power supply, I've talked to many newcomers who get afraid because they know or they've been told that a power supply contains capacitors that store enough charge to kill someone even if the power supply is not plugged in. And that's true. But I want you to keep the following points in mind and you really should be okay. The power supply is only an FRU when you replace the entire unit. Now, of course, you're wondering what the TLA, three-letter acronym, FRU means. It stands for Field Replaceable Unit. In other words, a power supply is designed to be easily removed and replaced in most cases. And I guess I made a pun there because we talk about computer cases, but the ATX power supply, regardless of brand, if it's a full-sized one, it'll have the same form factor and should fit any full-size computer chassis. Field replaceable unit means you can replace it, but I do not mean that that means you can open up the power supply and start monkeying around with its innards. That is absolutely not only a field replaceable unit, but that's where you could get into discharging stored electricity and get hurt. So please don't ever open a power supply unit unless you actually work for a PSU manufacturer. Another thing, I already made this point, that the more cables you have inside your computer chassis, the more reduced the airflow is and the less efficiency you have temperature-wise. So therefore, modular ATX power supplies are a good idea. I already mentioned sizing your PSU, and in the demo I'm going to give you some tips, tricks, and shortcuts that will help you size your PSU appropriately for a given system. And I guess I mentioned this point as well, that server systems that are in a rack that have a different form factor from desktop PCs, they still obviously have one or more power supplies. And that's actually what redundancy means. Many middle market or higher servers are going to come out of the box, literally and figuratively, with more than one power supply. And if you really want redundancy in your data center, what some administrators will do is connect each of those power supplies to a separate electrical circuit. Redundancy is a super important word, and if you plan to do systems administration or network administration, you'll learn that sooner rather than later. This picture is cool because it shows us installing a power supply unit. Of course, you're going to have to take the case apart. At least in a standard ATX chassis, it would just be the right side opposite the motherboard. You need a Phillips head screwdriver. Normally, power supplies don't use any funky Torx screws or anything. And typically, you'll have 4 screws that anchor the power supply into the host computer. So make sure you're holding onto it. There should be some kind of rail system to keep it from falling down. But the fact that this individual, that's not my hand by the way, that this individual is holding on to both sides of the PSU as he loosens the screws is a good idea. Remember that the power supply unit is connected to the motherboard at 1 or 2 places using those ATX connectors, and then we'll have a braid of cables, some of which are connected to devices and to the motherboard and others are not. You just want to make a note of what's used when you're doing your replacement. There's no shame in my opinion. I'll take out my cell phone and take a picture just to give me a visual picture, I guess, of what the system looked like prior to my starting to make changes.